Hello, authors and readers. I'm freelance fiction editor Miranda Darrow, and welcome to another novel deep dive. This one for Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman. In case you missed our earlier videos in this series, Novel Deep Dives is where I invite a guest or two to break down a recent best-selling title and use that novel to talk about an aspect or two of writing craft. I want to start with a spoiler warning. If you have not yet read Dungeon Crawler Carl Book 1 and don't want it spoiled, pause this video and come back after you've read it, as there will be spoilers for the featured book. But we're not going to spoil the whole series. We're just focusing on Book 1. We are pulling this book apart. It's forensic science level, and it does include plot spoilers. If you are interested in playing along and getting our list of questions, either for yourself or for your writing group or for a craft intensive book club, check out our book club booster kit. There's a link below. You can get the list of questions, and then you can follow the hashtags and join us. Invite three of your very bookish friends to your book club. This month's novel is a comedic sci-fi lit RPG. And we're giving writing craft tips on writing lit RPG and also for adding humor to your apocalypse. And my special guests this month are fellow editors Ayesha and Megan Manzano. And Megan's also a technical writer. And so they're both fabulous editors whom I met through the RevPit online novel revision contest. And I will have both of their websites down below in the description. Welcome, Ayesha and Megan.
Hi, thank you for this. I'm super excited to talk about this book.
Yeah, thank you. I am deeply obsessed with the series and I've kind of been like piecemealing it so I don't finish all of the books as much as I want to, but I am so obsessed. I was obsessed from page one.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to dig in. On paper, Dungeon Crawler Carl sounds almost impossible to take seriously. Aliens destroy Earth, survivors enter a televised dungeon crawl, and Carl's companion is a talking Persian cat. Yet readers become emotionally invested almost immediately. What specific writing craft choices help Dinniman establish credibility and emotional stakes despite the absurd premise? Megan.
I'm very glad that I get to answer this one because I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think that what makes it such a compelling opening in particular is Dinniman starts writing the action of it, and from a perspective that is, I don't know, already kind of exhausted by the fact that this apocalypse situation is happening. And I think even just some of the language that like Carl uses in the beginning, where he's like, all right, picture this. You're sitting here, it's Tuesday, you're doing about your things. And then this is when they like came and destroyed everything. And I think there's just that instant likability for Carl specifically. And also, I mean, I'm a lover of apocalypses. So if you're saying that like aliens came down and crushed an entire city, my brain is going, okay, now I need to know more about that. But I think, he does a very good job of like anchoring Carl in the chaos. Like, the buildings are destroyed. There's this like opening that you can jump into, and it's either you stay here and die or you go into this unknown. He obviously finds Princess Donut and is like, all right, now I have this cat. Like, I think there's just like so much happening that I think even as a reader, you would go, okay, I have no idea how to make sense of any of this, but I am just going to go with it. And I think this is something he really does well. Like, you are pulled in just as Carl is pulled in, and it's such a smart way to open something so big and vast.
Absolutely. And so I think one of the craft choices that he picked for the opening is that it doesn't actually start at the dungeon. It starts with Carl in our real world, in our world, for 6 pages. And we get to know Carl as a person that we could imagine being a neighbor or a friend or that guy down the hall. He's got a very relatable voice, and he comes off as kind of a put upon everyman. And then when we meet him, he's outside with his cat. And it's the cat, it's not his cat, it's his ex-girlfriend's cat. And they broke up because she went on a girls' trip and then posted social media pictures of her on her ex's lap. But Carl talks to Donut the cat, and that he talks about it, that he's trying to get Donut to her parents. But we later find out he hasn't been trying that hard. And then after we get to know Carl, and we're like, oh, this guy who got left behind and is now running around outside in his underpants to fetch this cat, then buildings start falling. And then, he's trapped in an apocalypse, not wearing enough clothing, And from a writing craft perspective, he really grounds us in who he is before we really throw him into the dungeon, but not for too long. We doesn't give us too, it's a perfect amount of grounding in reality or our reality before we enter the fantasy universe.
All that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with all that. And as a counterpoint to Megan, I usually do not like post-apocalyptics because it's so depressing. And honestly, I'm like, I don't want to see New York City and underwater, to give an example from Brandon Sanderson. That's the first thing that popped in my head. But this also did catch me from the beginning and did not let go. And I think two techniques come to mind when I look at this. And first is hanging a lantern on the absurdity of it. Like every time it happens, Carl is like, what in the world is going on? To not actually copy what they're saying and swear on your show. But yeah, they hang a lantern on it. Carl's like, okay, this is ridiculous, but I have to get through it. We're on a game show and everyone's watching. This is ridiculous. And now it has weight, emotional weight to it because they're playing us like toys. And I think the second thing, which is what I love most about this series and what keeps me recommending it, is it always comes back to the people. It always comes back to the characters. Carl's story goal is always protect who we find, help them survive, do the best we can. And that, like, there's a little bit of it in this book with him helping Meadowlark, but in the later books, it's even more so.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to move on to question 2. Lit RPG relies heavily on game mechanics, character stats, achievements, new achievement, quests. What does Dinniman do in book 1 that ensures these mechanics serve the story rather than interrupting it? And what can authors from any genre learn about that approach? Let's go with Ayesha first.
Well, I think you touched on it already, my first point, which is using real world details. And he goes, like, very specific details. I think of, no, the pink Crocs are one detail that we remember. The tree that Donut jumps into, the stop signs that are still there, the breeze of the ocean, and even very detailed description of what the door is before they walk into the dungeon. Also, the first few bosses that he encounters are more rooted in Earth lore, is what they call it. Earth lore, which allows you to get used to the style of what the story is and what the boss battles look like before we get into the more alien ones. And my second thought was the author doesn't assume that the reader/character knows everything about gaming, but he also doesn't treat us like idiots. You know, he treats us like he'll give us the pieces, we can put it together. Kind of exactly like what Andrew Stanton from Pixar said. Give the audience 2 plus 2, they'll come up with 4.
Perfect. Thank you. Megan, thoughts?
Yeah, I play a lot of TTRPGs and have written for them before out of a hobby. And I immediately really liked the introduction of those kind of TTRPG, lit RPG elements that I feel like are not always so easy to do in literature because you can make them way too long or boring or bogged down. And suddenly there's a reader who maybe never heard of a lit RPG and is like, wow, okay, there's so many rules to that, and now I'm like, I'm tapping out, right? Like part of the intimidation I even had when I was beginning to learn D&D was there are so many rules. How in any way possible am I going to learn how to do all this? And I learned it actually by watching media of other people playing and going, okay, like this makes sense in a story context. And I think that's exactly what's really strong about the lit RPG elements that he presents here, because there are achievements, there are item descriptions, there are boss battles, and these are all these things that feel like that could be difficult to translate. But I think the level of what was said about, trusting the reader to sort of understand things. And also I think that humor element comes into it. It's like, look, if you're intimidated by all these things, how do you make it more palatable? You make it funny, right? And there is, even I believe this is in book 1 where, he's complaining about how he never gets pants and how he wants pants, but then the achievements get more and more targeted towards him being pantsless. Like he gets the toe ring, he gets like an upgraded pair of boxers, and people are telling him like, the more you complain about it, the less you're going to get pants. And I feel like these are just the kind of anchoring and funny tidbits that you can use to make it more relatable versus it feeling like a manual.
Yeah, I'm new
Perfect.
to gaming, and I also love this. I think one of my favorite realizations when I first read it, I was like, I'm just sitting here anxious for him to open the loot boxes because I heard it somewhere, I don't know where, but it said that you give someone a box, they're more excited to open it than what's actually inside.
Yes. And in the later books too, like, the RPG elements get a little less detailed so much as they are in the beginning because they're trying to just get you used to that format. But every time there's a box and he's talking about a plan, I'm like, no, 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 please open the box. I can't wait 3 pages for you to open the box. Just tell me what the item is and then I promise
You
I'll pay
have to
attention.
get to a safe room. You can't
Yes,
open the
I
box, and
know.
then it's hanging out there teasing you.
And I'm thinking about it the whole time.
So I'm not a gamer. I play some tiny little apps on my phone, but I avoided reading this book for months, even though people were raving and you have to read it. And I'm like, no, I don't play video games. But loving video games is not necessary to enjoy this book. There. I knew that it would feature game stats. When I first read it, I listened to it on audiobook because that's how I read books usually the first time. And in audiobooks, if you saw a block of text that was explaining stuff, you can just kind of glide over that. But in no, in a paper book, but in an audiobook, unless you're really good at fast forward, you have to listen through them. So when they were doing the player designations in book one, it got a little boring, but every time we saw a person, they're a human with no class assigned. They're a human with no class assigned. So I was like, ew, this is a little bit draggy, except for Donut, who's a cat with no class assigned. But I did really enjoy the announcements of the new achievements, and it's because they were funny. And so there wasn't one of them that was just like a straight up, this is an achievement. It was, it was always something snarky, always something funny. And so one of the examples here, I wanted to give an example because we're teaching. Page 16 to 17. Congratulations, you've earned your first achievement. Crazy cat lady. You have entered the world dungeon accompanied by a cat. Ah, ain't that sweet? Reward, you received a bronze pet box. New achievement, trailblazing crazy cat lady. You are the first crawler to have entered the world dungeon accompanied by a cat. You must really love that thing. Too bad you're both probably going to die a horrible death at any moment. Or maybe not. Look at the prize box you just received. You received a legendary pet box. And so all of these, it's just like, and I'm reading them like the audiobook narrator reads them because that's how I hear them in my head. And it's very like game showy voice. And so when I got the paperback and I saw that these were all bold and offset, I could see that I could skip past those ones where it was the character introduction. And so maybe I wouldn't have had that repetition. But Dinniman did make these less tedious and repetitive by adding humor to the descriptions, especially with the loot and the mobs and the skills and the achievements. Even though listening to this on an audiobook with my teenagers in the car, and then they were describing the foot squish skills. I'm like,
Mush.
can I just teleport out of this car until we're done talking about the foot squishing skills? But even that humor, it didn't read as dry, and it gave Carl a reason to be barefoot in the dungeon. All right. Next question. Carl spends much of the novel reacting to challenges imposed by the dungeon system. How does Dinniman maintain a sense of character agency even when he's within a highly restrictive set of rules? Let's start with that, Ayesha.
Okay, so this was something I had to think about, but what I realized rereading it was that here his reaction to each thing that comes up is different. Like the first boss with the hoarder, he just charges in and throws some dynamite and then keeps reacting from then. When he goes to approach the goblins, he has another plan, a plan to get some transport, and then the rest of it goes crazy because he's still reacting. When we get to the burrow boss with Meadowlark, they're like creating a whole plan ahead of time, have multiple pieces, multiple people, characters in their position. And so just I guess how you react to things, it makes the difference. And if you have a different goal in mind, like getting the chariot. No, that's not called a chariot, this one. That's a later book. I guess the motorcycle chopper, the chopper from the goblins is a separate goal that enhances what they're doing. And then later on the second floor, getting the metal arc down the stairs before, so that they don't have to be in danger for so long. That is separate goals that makes it more interesting and dynamic.
Perfect. Thanks. Megan, what you got?
Yeah, I think about it from Carl's mindset a lot, where I think even from the first choice he makes to go inside the dungeon showed his agency right away, because he kind of very quickly analyzes what's in front of him and just goes, okay, I can sit here for hours and not make a decision, or I can make a decision. And then throughout the book, he's kind of constantly making decisions, whether or not they abide by the rules or not. And obviously, as like the later books goes on, he continues to break more of the rules. But I think that's something that really stands out about him, is like the mantra that he repeats a lot, where he constantly says, like, you will not break me, which is, it's that rebellious nature, but it's also a degree of stubbornness and determination that I think carries every single decision. He's not a passive character in any way. He takes every single thing that he learns, from being able to being like, okay, if I have this toe ring that makes my foot less indestructible, I guess I'm going to crush things with it. Okay, that builds experience. Okay, I guess this is the like twisted way that we're doing that. Or as he starts to discover different components, like with fire or with manipulating certain characters, when he realizes that they're not that intelligent, which comes from some of these achievements that we've talked about, right? Like he takes in everything and adapts his strategy, while also, I think, sticking to the core of who he is the entire time. Like there's a continuity even across books where he wants to protect people. He wants to like win, not out of a pure like infamous kind of viewpoint, but rather of like, here's this alien colony that has come in, made like destroyed my entire planet, making a mockery of all of us, killing people left and right. And I want to win it just to prove to them that they just can't come in here and like make us feel weak. And I think that's a very compelling sense of agency, and it's very hard to break a character who has that resolve. And I think that's what makes him so compelling as he moves throughout the dungeon.
That reminds me of a scene later in the book where he gets a slingshot, I think, from one of the mobs, and he insists on training with the thing, even though he's no good at it. And then in the end, he is still no good at it. But I think that also adds to the agency part, where you're like, you try it, you can fail, it's okay. And I think a lot of writers, me too, I would say so, is like, it's really hard to let your characters fail because you fail so much in real life. But sometimes agency is just try fail.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that we get to see Carl's agency as his goals evolve. When he first starts out, his goal is to literally save the cat. He's in the yard, he's trying to get this cat back in there, and the neighbor lady is yelling, "Why are you outside?" or whatever. And then his goal is to get out of the cold. He's outside, it's cold out, he's in his tidy whities or whatever it was before he got the fabulous heart boxers. Then his goal is survive the game. So he's like, I gotta survive and protect Donut. But as he goes along, he starts like adopting more and more people that he wants to protect, even these folks from the nursing home that have literally nothing to offer him in his overall goal of surviving. But his goal is not as much surviving as it is staying human and showing that he cares about others and showing the aliens that we're not going to be just a bunch of animals. He'd rather risk his own life than become the selfish monster that the game wants him to be. So he's clinging to humanity, fighting for dignity, and it gives him purpose. And that's a person that I want to follow, a person who's on a mission, even though he's not in control of what's going on. It reminds me of the character plot line from the TV show The Walking Dead of Glenn Reed. So Glenn was a college student, he was delivering pizzas, and he wants to survive, but more than that, he wanted to stay human. So for longer than anybody else in Rick Grimes's group, Glenn wouldn't and didn't kill other living human beings. He killed plenty of zombies, but he didn't kill human beings. And it wasn't until they ran into Negan's crew that he broke this rule. And that was the beginning of the end for Glenn. So no more spoilers for that one. But he was the moral center. And so Carl is fighting for more than just survival. He's fighting for humanity. And so I think one of the best examples in this book is when he goes on the game show and I can't remember what the pig boy's name was. It Maestro or something like that.
Yes, the maestro.
Yeah, Maestro. And then it was glurp glurp or whatever. But rather than sitting back and watching two complete strangers have to pick two people of their group to survive while the rest of them die, he offers to him and Donut, we'll go in there, we'll help you fight. And that was like book one, breaking their rules to try to back up other humans that he'd never met before. He's principled. There are things that he values more than life. So, okay, that's why I think that he claims agency despite not really being in control. Okay. Next question. One of the most impressive aspects of the novel is its pacing. Looking specifically at the early floors, well, that's what we're looking at in this book. How does the author balance action, exposition, world building, and character development without slowing the momentum? Megan, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because there's so much happening in this book all at once that you're being thrown into and trying to understand. There's the fact that you're in a dungeon, there's all these different achievements, there's an actual strategy, if you could call it, to the game. There are rules you're supposed to follow. There are like 100 different types of classes and people and things that you're getting used to. And I think what makes it very effective with the pacing is I think everything feels intentional. You're not getting like, here's 50 pages of full exposition about every single thing you can do in the game, and that's it. You're learning it as Carl learns it as a reader yourself. And that just helps with pacing in general because you're not getting like, if you end up in a situation like this where it's completely off the rules, this is not an Earth made game. These are like alien races and companies you have no concept of what they could want or mean out of something. It's very easy to fall into the trap of like, okay, we have to give everybody all this information so they're settled. But the thing is, Carl doesn't know that. Everybody who's in the game doesn't know that. And, it's a series, so it's going to get more in depth as it goes on. So I think what the pacing really balances it is it lets you learn things on your own. It introduces characters that have like different views of what they should do. There are people who are like, all right, we're in this dungeon. We get to kill people. Let's go gung ho. This is what I wanted to do in real life, but obviously now I can do it. And then you have people like Carl, who's more of like what we just spoke about, like that human aspect and wanting to care for people. There are, people who just don't understand how the game works. And it creates these different levels and breaks in the story where you can kind of figure things out. And you have boss battles, you have the game shows and the on air times. And in a way that a video game works, it leads you through different things so that your brain is kind of switching gears and being stimulated in different ways that you don't get bored. And I think it's a really good master class of like, here's so much information, but we're giving it to you in a way that feels really natural and builds upon what came before it. And I think that's kind of how you balance it. It's a feat that I was impressed by because I could very much see someone being like, I don't know where this is going, but he does it in a way that feels really good. And I think, again, going back to the humor, if you get someone to laugh along through it, right, like you're more likely to be more invested. So that's how I feel he does a really good job with it.
Perfect.
Going back to what we talked earlier about wanting to open the loot boxes or wanting to see what snarky thing the AI says next, I think one technique he uses is to put in a lot of those little, what do you call it, wins, I guess? Like little morsels that even if you're not interested in one little piece, you're interested in something else. And it's for like a lot of different readers can look forward to the loot boxes opening, the next boss battle. Like this systematic way of video games, actually, he uses it to his advantage in that way.
Yes.
I think this is one of my favorite things from Brandon Sanderson's lectures. He says that make sure that every scene you write is somebody's favorite. Doesn't have to be everybody's favorite, but if it's somebody's favorite, they'll keep reading for the next one.
Oh, I love that. Okay, first, I want to give kudos to the author for the foreshadowing. They plant clues in the game feature announcements that pay off later. So an example for this is crawlers need to use the toilets. So first, it's a humorous announcement with hints about in prior seasons. The viewers were not really thrilled with seeing people defecating in the hallways. So that's the first, and it's a humorous and it's announced. Then there's a stern warning. There will be consequences if crawlers do not use the restroom. And then near the end of this book, nursing home resident Jack whizzes in the hallway, and the game takes out most of the nursing home crew, including Nurse Yolanda. There weren't any mobs in that hallway. This should have been like a mundane, boring scene of how are we going to get these, and are these people too much of an anchor? And then Jack just peeing in the hall. And that was a very quick change of pace and tone and everything, because even that are moments that are relatively safe can turn deadly here. I also think it was brilliant for Dinniman to include the safe rooms and the training grounds, because this allows for the pacing to go to high action and danger to slower paced organically through the structure of the dungeon. So let's look at the first foray that into the level 1. They almost immediately fall into a trap and are chased by goblins. And they see this tutorial guild and they want to get in, but they're like, no, you can't get in if there's mobs present. So they have to. They're forced to have this action scene where they battle against this goblins, 3 of them, and they've got some kind of vehicle that they're on. And Carl is required to kill these creatures, including he needs to squish one with his own body mass because he doesn't have any weapons at all. So then they make it into the tutorial guild. We're all just, that was so exciting. We know he's not really going to die because it's Dungeon Crawler Carl, and that's Carl, and this was chapter 2. But then we can slow down the pace and we meet Mordecai, and he gives us some of the world building. He doesn't give us all 18 floors or whatever, but he talks about, well, when you get to level 3, you're going to be able to choose a different race. Well, this book ends at the end of level 2. So there's some suspense. What's going to happen? What's he going to do? I'm going to have to read book 2. And then, so he gets enough world building so that they know we need to level up our skills. So they can't just sit around being safe. They have to go out and practice, and then they stumble into the pack of drug dealing llamas, and then they face off against the hoarder and all these other things. So we go from danger to safety, which allows for scene and sequel, which is like action and reflection. So if it was all just action, like a Michael Bay movie, perhaps, some of the Transformer ones, there's very little time for reflection and character development and backstory. And these are all things that give Carl his great voice and make him such a lovable character. Let's go on to the next question. Princess Donut could easily have been a one-note comic sidekick. Instead, many readers end up caring about her almost as much as they do about Carl. What techniques does Dinniman use to transform what could have been a joke character into an emotionally significant one? Ayesha.
Yep, we all love Princess Donut, and I think this is my favorite technique to give to people, especially when they're writing their queries for their books. It is, Donut has an inherent contradiction in her personality. She has basically 2 things warring inside of her. One side is the show cat who needs to put up appearances and act all princessy and royally, which is why Carl gets annoyed with her when she first starts talking and chews her out for it. Then there's the other side, the side that knows that this is all a show, that Miss Beatrice is only, I guess that's a spoiler for later, but she knows that Miss Beatrice was about to sell her because she wasn't making enough money. And she loves hanging out with Carl. She feels safe with Carl, but she's still a show cat. So it is a constant battle all the way through this book and even in later books. And that is so interesting, especially when it's well done.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I love that you brought up that dichotomy. Megan, thoughts?
I could talk about Princess Donut for like a whole hour in itself, but I will trim it down. I think what's really interesting about Princess Donut is even in like a gaming perspective, like there are sometimes animals that are just meant to be like comic relief or follow a character around and add some kind of like empathy to that character, but that's it. I think what's really interesting about Princess Donut off the bat is she has like 2 things that she brings in. One is she has insight into Miss Beatrice that Carl doesn't have, because obviously it's implied that Beatrice was like cheating on him. So the fact that like Princess Donut will like drop random names or scenarios and be like, oh, right, maybe that was Ferdinand. And then Carl's like, who's Ferdinand? And then she moves on to like another topic, right? I think that's like very interesting perspective to be like, your pets or your animals know what you're doing all the time if you're with them. And if they did have a voice, what would they tell you, right? Or what would they tell like the person you live with or the friend, right? So I think that's immediately hilarious to me is like, what would your pets actually say to you, right? And then I think the other level of this is the concern and closeness that she has with Carl that like is not immediately like transcribed through all of their dialogue, but rather like the actions that they have together, like the way she will kind of trust him implicitly. She'll want to sleep with him in the training rooms at night, right? Like this kind of comfort that she finds. But one scene in particular that I think really illustrates a lot of this is she's not just a cat, and obviously the dungeon builds up her intelligence a little bit more and her ability to communicate. But there's this really lovely scene on page 292 where fighting the Harakan clone, and Carl gets like knocked against the wall, his health is dropping, and Donut says, "Don't fire any more missiles." And then Donut says, "If we die, I want you to know that I love you, Carl. I don't love you as much as I love Miss Beatrice because she's my person, or as much as I love Ferdinand, but I love you." And he's telling her to like focus. And he goes like, "Who's Ferdinand anyways, right?" But then he's like, he thinks about how what Princess Donut was going to do, which was be sold. And I think that there's this like that's like the whole entirety of their relationship is like they both kind of know different things about each other, but there's still a love that like guides them together, and it adds depth to that relationship. Other than the fact that Princess Donut is really funny, and I think that they do give her cat-like qualities, like when she discovers that like there are ratings, and all she does care about is getting higher and higher in the ratings, and is way more interested in that and the stuff that she gets more than anything else, in a way that a cat like does herd things and look for things, especially shiny things. So I just think he makes it feel like a cat plus, like a cat plus. There's like something compelling about that.
Excellent. So I'm going to admit I was not a Donut fan right away. I was drawn in by Carl, but I was a little annoyed by Donut. And part of it was the princess persona, and I'm a dog person. Okay, so the real emotional connection came to me when Donut was worried that Carl might abandon her after she realized that she doomed herself to a level 9 showdown with some entire royal family by putting on the tiara without reading the description, but it was purple. And I was just like, oh my God, you're going to get Carl killed. That's what I was thinking. But Donut liked Carl even before the apocalypse. And then once she was able to talk, Donut says that she knew that Carl had been looking for apartments that were cat friendly. And so she knew that he actually liked her despite their banter. And in that scene, yes, you're right. In this book, they do talk about the fact that B was looking to trade her in for a different show cat who could win more contests and prizes. And it's just like, Carl sees you as a living being and not as an object, a showpiece. And it's just a man caring about a cat. But I really, Donut won my respect when she got her paws dirty protecting Carl, because she wanted to sit back and only use laser beams and not have to really get into the fray. But when it came down to it, she jumped on there and she attacked, because with her superior strength. So sometimes she can be a little overly positive and a little superficial, but it counterbalances Carl's cynicism and his snark. So I think they work well together. Next up, humor is everywhere in this novel, but so are grief, death, and desperation. How does Dinniman use comedy to strengthen rather than undermine the darker elements of the story? Let's start with Megan.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think when it comes to apocalyptic scenarios, especially ones like this, where if you take it just for face value, right? Alien invasion, destruction, changing the rules of the game. I'm thinking back to that nursing home scene where one of the people to pee, and they've adapted the rule that if you do that, you're going to get blown up, right? There's a lot to just get bogged down in and give up. And I think what humor does in these situations is remind us of the goal that we were talking about with Carl's, like he wants to preserve humanity. And I think being able to keep a sense of humor or lightness during all of this is how you're able to subvert grief, and I'm going to be one of those people, because obviously I think one of the best examples of all of how to do apocalypses right or things is like the Hunger Games, right? And what is like the biggest like Snow says that like the most destructive thing you can have is hope, because if you have hope, then the fear is never really truly going to be enough to wear you down. And I think it's different in this, because there is a level of, I think, overriding hopelessness in a situation like this, but connecting with other people, making them laugh, being out there for you, these like basic comforts and empathy is what makes the novel less heartbreaking. Because if, say, like this was a different story where it's like it's cutthroat, everyone's going here killing each other, and it's more of just like an action thriller, or let's say Transformers, because I think Michael Bay is a good example, then you probably wouldn't care as much. It probably wouldn't be as popular. You'd probably just watch it or read it for the action, then you'd maybe forget about it. But humor is the tool to keep you as a reader and everybody in the story willing to continue. And especially like in later novels where Carl has many more people involved and has a more, complex understanding of where everybody kind of is. That is why they choose to follow him, even if he's, even if they call him crazy multiple times or think that he's too risky. Like that sense of humor is what keeps the darkness at bay fully.
Absolutely. So I think not everything is a joke. When Carl faces off against the Hoarder, the first boss on level 1, he knows she's asking for help and he realizes she's a person, likely somebody harvested by the aliens when they took over and destroyed all the buildings. And it's not just the crawlers who are victims for the game, too. It was everybody else on Earth, and some of these bosses and other ones are, unwilling participants. And he feels horrible. And he's like, oh, we should help her. She's asking for help. And Donut says that'd be a no, because Donut's more pragmatic there. It's just like, we can't do that. So Carl is really torn about it, but they have to. She's got like bugs coming out of her everywhere. And then we meet like the folks who are in the pyramid scheme, the multi-level marketing one where they're selling whatever that is. And that's hilarious because it's relatable to the real world. And they talk about B having a closet full of leggings that Donut had peed on. And we're like, oh yeah, that's relatable. I knew somebody who sold those stupid leggings and got stuck with a bunch of them. And so that's very funny. There's a lot of caricatures of people on Earth with a lot of irreverence. And Carl comes in and he doesn't pull any punches in his narration. And sometimes the announcer really plays up with the absurd situation. So there's funny things on almost every page, but then that accentuates when the book is more serious. Like when he realizes that the bosses were people, when he realizes that a couple had killed their own daughter, and when he remembers how his father treated his mother. And you're like, oh. And so those stand out a lot more because there is so much humor. And it's not just like, what's more sad? Can we be more sad than that? And it's like, no, we're balancing this.
I am not someone who enjoys comedy in books. I think it's a lot harder to pull it off in writing than the actor standing there with his facial expressions and the goofy music and whatnot. And I think, I mean, I'm not an expert, but to me, what he uses is a very specific type of humor, which I guess is situational and character-based humor. Like, he's very careful to flesh out these characters and to have their personalities clash. Obviously, Donut and Carl are the first example you'll think of. But then there's other characters, like Brandon is not Carl, and he has his own way of thinking, and Imani has her own way of thinking, and each of them commenting and reacting to different situations clashes and creates great situational humor, all while still maintaining that we need to survive, we need to defeat this boss, we need to keep going. So that's what I got from this book.
Excellent. Okay, next question. The relationship between Carl and Princess Donut becomes the emotional heart of the first novel. What can authors learn from the way that Dinniman develops their partnership and builds reader investment in their success? Megan, you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what makes their relationship so successful over time in book 1 is I think they're both united by the same sort of trauma, which is the abandonment of Beatrice. Donut gets more details later about what Beatrice was planning to do with her overall. And Carl feels like the literal physical abandonment of, she, went out with the girls, cheated on him with another man, and is not coming back, right? And I think that gives them this good bonding point of having these feelings. And then you factor in what you said earlier about Donut not wanting to be left alone, especially in this scenario. And you factor in Carl's traumatic past of clearly having an abusive father, having someone that was really distant. And it gives them a lot to reach across lines to bond over. They both don't really want to be alone in this, regardless of whatever front they're putting up. And I think that's just something that very successfully works in a campaign like this. It's like, okay, we have no idea what's going on, but if I'm anchored to you and you're anchored to me, then we can kind of do everything together. And I think also just like their relationship in comparison to other ones, there's not one that's like it. I think one of the closest examples of like a little bit of a difference is, for example, when Princess Donut meets Mongo, and which for readers is a little dinosaur who I was so happy when that happened. And she treats Mongo like a pet, and you're seeing a pet treat a pet like this, and like watching the affection that she has towards him be very different than Carl, and the affection she has towards other people like Brandon or Naomi, where she's immediately skeptical of these people. And I think their bond just being very unique and continuing to grow throughout the story is what makes it so compelling. It's what you want to look for when you read, is seeing growth across characters and seeing something that, regardless of pages, is still always going to be true. And so I think that's the biggest success, what makes you want to root for them, and also just makes me continue wanting to see them grow and change across the series.
Oh, I'm so happy you brought up Mongo because
Mhm.
Mongo bit her in the
Yeah.
face
Hmm.
multiple times. And there was pressure because if they weren't bonded by a certain point, he wouldn't go with them. She would
Yeah.
lose the pet if she couldn't build that bond. And she worked very hard at it. And Donut is not used to working very hard at anything. And
Definitely
so,
not.
but no. And so, yeah, I thought that was great. Aisha, did you have anything for this one or should we?
I wanted to say that my favorite relationships in any media is the ones that, in the end, prioritize love over anything else, right? They fight a lot. Donut refuses to fight with her claws because she knows Carl can do it. But when push comes to shove, even when push doesn't come to shove, love comes first. And there is never a question of, do I hate this cat? Do I hate this person? Or drama for the sake of drama, because there's enough drama in the story without there being relationship drama. That can't be solved within a few minutes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Many fantasy and sci-fi authors struggle with complicated systems and rules. What lessons can writers learn from Dungeon Crawler Carl about introducing world building without overwhelming? We talked a little bit about it in the pacing section, but if folks have other stuff we want to add about world building, Aisha, you want to go ahead?
I have 2 points on this. I think the first one is that Mordecai delivers information using the method of story questions. And story questions are basically something happens in your scene, which makes the reader wonder. Ask a question. Ask what's going to happen, not just what's going to happen next, but why did this happen? This, and you know, what does that mean? And based on that, I think he really got into the head of the reader and tried to figure out where their natural thinking will go. And that's the next piece of information that came. A lot of times when you write sci-fi and fantasy, you have a whole list of information that you need to get out. And you just start listing it in paragraphs. And then by the time you get back to the story, you've forgotten what the first piece of information was that was probably the most relevant to the story, and now you're lost. But with story questions, with really figuring out what's the next natural thing the reader's going to wonder about, you can keep their attention for 2 whole chapters, which is what happens. My second point is Carl thinks about the information. He just doesn't passively take it. He thinks about it. He comes up with his own questions that are unique to him that we would never go to, but are instantly interesting, fascinating to us because we're following this character who thinks differently than us. That is how I think the world building is so wonderfully given to us, even though it looks like an info dump.
Okay, Megan? Did you?
Yeah. Um, I do have thoughts on this. A lot of the editing that I've done over my many years is spec fic, especially in the sci-fi and fantasy realm. And a lot of advice that I have given out is similar to this sort of challenge that this question addresses of, you are either dumping too much information here, or you're leaving it too bare, or it's not well paced out. And one of my biggest notes that I give to authors like that is there are sensory and contextual ways to give information that is informative but still relevant to the character. And I think some of the ways that they do this in Dungeon Crawler Carl um, is they have the sort of like wrap ups of the game for that day that they do occasionally, which will tell you like who's in the leaderboard, do recaps of really key events. And, those are maybe like a page at most. It's not pages of Carl like talking to so and so and talking to so and so, and he's putting together like a mental map of all this happening. Rather, this is kind of your like cheat sheet of like, here, hey, like here are key players to pay attention to, or hey, this corporation is doing something a little weird. Like, what's that about? And I think another great tactic too is what we were talking about a little bit earlier of Carl having this sense of agency where he is a curious character. He is trying to figure things out. He's looking at all the moving pieces and making decisions based off of that, not just from a story perspective, but mechanic wise. Like, for example, when he gets the jugs and the like goblin goo and he goes, huh, I can make like a Molotov cocktail out of this. That's a really cool idea, right? And I think that it's just you're learning a lot of the information through what Carl is experiencing and feeling and literally like touching and fighting against. And I think that's the strongest way to build world building. And he does that so well is it's just here's not an info dump, but it's like, okay, he encountered these goblins. It made him feel like this. Now he learns this. Or I had this conversation with Donut and oh, she's acting like this, and that's making me think about this. Or here's the show that I have to go on. Why the hell do I have to do that? And it's like, oh, you learned a part of a game. You learned a mechanic. You learned a fact, but it feels natural. And I think that is the strongest thing that any reader could take away from this.
I just want to add that this is basically a portal type world where brand new character comes in and experiences the world, but you can still use that technique if you are doing a secondary world, fantasy or sci-fi, where the characters know the world, but obviously they're going to encounter new things. So just having the conversation, actively thinking about what you see, putting things together, and just taking a look at pieces that you want to explain to the reader and ask, how can this naturally come up? Like, what situation would my character naturally think about? Well, how does the school system work? Or where did I first learn magic or something crazy like that?
Yeah, I think my world building tips are usually to avoid info dumping is just what you need and just when you need it. And so they spread it out. We get to see world building through Mordecai, who was their primary one, but we also get a bunch of world building from their social media manager, the woman from the fish race, and she bonds with Donuts over Gossip Girl. And we find out stuff from TV show hosts and the announcer and other players and stuff too. And so it's coming in from all these places. It's not all at one place. And it's all filtered through Carl's perspective. We're in Carl's perspective. We're learning it as Carl's learning it. And so you're right about this is a portal and he's entering and it's natural for him to like comment and think about things because he's learning them. And so it is tougher to do when they're in their own world. And so, all right, next question. The dungeon's rules often create limitations, but those limitations also generate conflict and creative problem solving. How does this novel demonstrate the storytelling principle that constraints can make the story stronger? Ayesha, let's start with you.
Oh, this was like my favorite part of the story when I first read it was their creative ways of fighting these boss battles and figuring things out. And for me, this ties back to world building. You have a limited space. That means you need to get really detailed on what that space is, what's in there, what can you learn, what can you do in that space, and brainstorming that will really help.
All
Are my
right,
thoughts.
Megan, you got anything for this one?
I think that these are going to sound like opposed ideas, but I'll explain. The reason why the dungeon rules work is because they're consistent but also reactive. And I know that is like a little bit contradictory with each other, but I say consistent because the rules of the dungeon and the overall purpose of the game, even the tone of the recaps, the way information is presented, that is still going to be kind of the same. There's usually some kind of sassy element, a humor element, a logistical point they're trying to give you, even if they're backhanding you on the way. And so the rules of the game, I think, always remain present to the reader and to Carl and to everybody else who is playing. However, as things are changing with either player tactics, the way people are grouping together, if entertainment is like rising or falling, the game changes to alter those circumstances, but the core will still remain the same. Like you still gotta survive, you still gotta kill, kill, kill. But if you are rebelling or insulting people on the show like he does with the maestro, there are going to be consequences to that. Like when he goes on a death show and the his like view completely blacks out, and then the social media manager Zeb checks in and is like, are you guys okay? Like, what's going on, right? Like, here is something different that is beginning to happen that is causing characters who are a part of this alien corporation to go, what is happening? And I think that's what's so interesting about it, is like, how do you stick to your rules but also change it in a way that is still compelling? Because one of my biggest pet peeves with especially like a long running series, whether it's a TV show or game, is when it breaks its own rules. And for me, the biggest pet peeve is with like time travel rules. You establish a consequence, you establish that you can't do one of these three things, and then suddenly, for convenience, you can do it. But actually, I think this book really works against Carl, and even in like the later things where like they give him rules that make it harder and harder and harder. And I think that's what's so strong about it. Like the constraints are helping because you're like, how is Carl, how is Princess Donut, how are all the people he meets along the way going to actually survive? This is becoming more impossible. And so the challenge is the constraint actually raises the stakes in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about in one of the early battles when Carl used the table and protected himself. And if it hadn't been for his extra strong feet, he'd probably be dead because he was nearly dead. And so, but he knew that was a glitch. He wouldn't say anything because he didn't want them to correct that glitch, and he had exploited it. And it's just like, yeah, you know that there's going to be a point where they're going to change that. And so it's like, well, use it while you can, but it'll probably fail at just the moment that you need it. And they'll be like, oh yeah, we fixed that gap. So, all right, now we've got our last question. If an author wanted to study Dungeon Crawler Carl as a model for their own writing, what is the single most valuable craft lesson that they should take away from this novel? Megan, let's start with you.
Oh man, there's so many that I can give, but I think considering how big this book is in terms of genre, in terms of scope, in terms of a series that it is being made, I think the most valuable lesson that you can take from this is, despite whatever wild amount of twists, turns, genre blending you want to do, I think at the end of the day, if you have a really compelling character, a really compelling group of characters, you can go through anything. Because I think for most people, most readers, what you want to care about is the person who's telling you the story, the person that you're seeing the world from. And because Carl, the way that he thinks, the motivations that he has and changes throughout the story, and Princess Donut as she grows and more people are added. Like I even think Mordecai also like goes through his own development and has to confront things that he's been in the system for a really long time. Even Mongo has development, right? Like Donut eventually can actually, train with him and sit on him and like have a bond with him later on, right? I think no matter what the background is, the chaos, having characters that root you into the moment will always be the strongest way to move forward through the story. So I think that's the best thing someone could learn from reading this.
Thank you. Ayesha?
I totally agree with Megan that there's so many lessons to learn, and hers is very important. I'm going to go a different way and touch upon something we talked about earlier, which is make sure you make all your choices intentionally. Like everything in this book is intentional. The tone, the humor, the darkness, the way people interact. And I think, to me, if you make your choices intentional, they are A, more show that you are confident, and then B, they are much easier to undo if you don't like them. If you know you chose to make this part funny, and then now you're like, I don't want to make it funny, I'm going to change the tone, then you can go back and easily find the pieces. But if you simply have, this is how it turned out, and I don't know, I don't like it, I don't know what I did, which can happen still, but the more intentional choices you make, the easier it'll be to revise, the more confident you'll be in yourself, and the more fun it'll be for everybody else.
Thank you. So my tip is, authors, don't be afraid to try a less than mainstream format for your novel, but don't let the structure overshadow the story. Let the characters shine through, be unique, learn and grow, have agency, even if they don't have control of the situation, so that they can find themselves. So you can use the Lit RPG framework, you can use epistolary, you can use reverse chronological order, whatever fun little framework that you want to use. It is the frame, but make sure that your story and your characters are the stars that shine through. All right. I want to thank my guests so much for joining me. This is freelance fiction editor Miranda Darrow, encouraging everybody to follow and subscribe so you can see more novel deep dives where we dig into current best-selling novels to help authors learn fiction writing skills. And so for everyone, thanks so much and happy writing. Be sure to like and subscribe. This is freelance fiction editor Miranda Darrow wishing you happy writing.